What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to conclude the divisional previews in preparation for the 2025 fantasy football season. We will be doing the NFC West today. So we will go through all four NFC West teams. We are going to talk quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, defense, and kicker for each of these teams. Discuss where there is value at each of the positions, where there are potential sleepers later in your draft, and where there are potential busts as well. So if you're interested in more content like this, if you want to check out the other divisions that I previewed over the past few weeks, you can check that out on this channel. Please subscribe. If you want to check out other fantasy football content to prep you for the upcoming season, take a look at that as well and drop a comment. I reply to all my commenters, so please take advantage of that with this small channel and ask any questions that you got. So we will start and go through this alphabetically. We will begin with the Arizona Cardinals. And first of all, Kyler Murray, one of the more polarizing quarterbacks in the NFL. And for fantasy, when I did my quarterback rankings, I had him as my number 8 quarterback. So with Kyler Murray, there's a lot of upside with him potentially, but he has shown some inconsistency through the years that maybe prevented me from taking him a little bit higher than that. But Kyler Murray is going in a range in mock drafts right now on Sleeper around the mid-10th round. That is pretty good value to try to take advantage of somebody with his talent. He does display tons of physical abilities, and at times he looks like he's easily a top 5 quarterback talent in the league. But then there's other times he's kind of up and down with his performances and looks a little bit unreliable. So the hope with this season is now that they've got another year under Marvin Harrison working with this offense, that Kyler Murray, that he might be able to have a little more consistency for this upcoming season. But he is going late enough that he is a good player to take in that range. I think that's acceptable. Generally, when I'm drafting quarterbacks, I'm trying to either get one of the top 4 guys that I mentioned in my quarterback video that I made 2 weekends ago. The elite quarterbacks, I try to see if I can get one of them, but if not, I'm generally kind of waiting until the range where you might be able to stream. But Kyler Murray is one of those talents that's available late that you can't really get among a lot of the other quarterback options available. So very good target to consider, especially if you happen to get Trey McBride or Marvin Harrison Jr. early on. The backup is Jacoby Brissett. Interesting choice to me because Jacoby Brissett doesn't really bring a lot of the same skill sets as Kyler Murray. So I was kind of surprised they brought him on. And then Clayton Tune, the third string. If anything were to happen to Kyler, I think this would be a pretty rough backup situation for all fantasy assets involved, except for maybe McBride. James Conner as the running back. So he is going in a range that is pretty good among running backs. I will double check the sleeper update today, but he generally has been going around the 5th or 6th round, which is not bad for somebody of his caliber. He is a very talented running back, and the question though with him is the injury history. He's going early 6th round on sleeper in the most recent mock draft. So he's going at a good range, but you worry about the injury history with him. He did have a lot of carries last season, but he is one of the better running backs that can fill an every down role that you have in this league. And I do believe that he still will be pretty good for fantasy. If you're taking him in the 6th round, you're getting him maybe as your 2nd or 3rd running back. That's a pretty reasonable range to take him, in my opinion. Trey Benson is a very underrated handcuff, though, that has upside to potentially be more involved in this offense. He looked pretty good last season at times, just didn't really have the opportunity. And if James Conner were to get injured, or if he just has normal wear and tear that's expected of people around his age, Trey Benson could be more involved. He's generally not on mock draft boards at all in sleeper. So this is a good pickup that you can get late, especially if you happen to have Conner to cover yourself in this Arizona backfield. And one of the things that I will mention that at least what we saw last year is that Arizona was a lot more effective as a running team during that middle stretch of the season where they were successful. So maybe they try to implement that a little bit more because if they do, then there's a world where both Connor and Benson are involved and can both be pretty good for fantasy. Amari DiMercato has been on the team for a few years now. Really not too interested in him. He has shown some flashes at times, but is clearly the third running back here. And then DJ Dallas, more of a special teams player, but could get involved if there's injuries. Marvin Harrison Jr. was one of the more disappointing players in fantasy last season, but if you actually look at his numbers, it's stacked up pretty similarly to a lot of rookies and how they perform historically. You know, he kind of had a poor stretch to end the season that kind of hurt his production in terms of how we looked at him. But he still was the number 30 wide receiver, which is roughly around the range of a flex. Not really what you were trying to aim for when he was drafted in the second round in 2024 on average. But there is a chance that he can turn this around and become a better pick here in 2025. He still is the most talented receiver on this offense. Wide receiver, not necessarily pass catcher. I think you still give that to Trey McBride. But Marvin Harrison Jr., he seemingly wasn't really utilized very well in the offense. They were kind of trying to use him more as a X receiver, when I think in reality he's better employed as more of a possession receiver that can move around in the mid-range part of the field. So hopefully they kind of can use that a little bit more with him and try to get him more involved, because I think that he, if utilized properly, can look a lot better than he did at times last season. Michael Wilson is a very underrated wide receiver too on this team that is also not getting drafted and should still have a pretty good role on the Cardinals as well. In the deep leagues, I do like Michael Wilson as somebody that you can stash on your bench and see what happens to him. There was a stretch during the 2024 season where he was pretty firmly in the discussion of whether to start or sit certain weeks because of his volume share that he was getting in the offense, and he did get plenty of targets along the way as well. I still like him given the other receivers on this team to be the second wide receiver here. You also have guys like Zay Jones, who has bounced around for quite a bit. You have Greg Dortch, who has been on the Cardinals for a little while, but has not really taken the advantage of stepping into the starting unit and being consistent with it. Simi Fehoko, who was on the Chargers most recently, bounced around a little bit trying to fight for a spot in the team, and a couple of other guys as well that are not really high-profile names. So because of that, it's pretty clearly Marvin Harrison and Michael Wilson's receiving core to lose at this point, and I think both of them will be able to get enough volume as receivers that they should be of interest in fantasy. I don't really love taking Marvin Harrison Jr. where he is going in the fourth round, but I do get the upside there. For me personally, though, he falls right in the range of guys like Kamara and Hampton, and at this point, I've generally already have been pretty comfortable with my receivers that I've taken either in the second or third round and trying to get an elite second running back. So that's why I generally have not been drafting MHJ, is because of the running backs that are in that range. Trey McBride, as I talked about in my tight end video, you can watch that for a little more detail where I go in depth about Trey McBride and how it's expected that there'll be some positive regression to the mean with his touchdowns, because he was shut out from getting a touchdown for most of the season last year up until the end. He also performed very similarly to Brock Bowers, despite the fact that he did go for a long stretch without a touchdown. And I think that in general, there was a lot of discussion of whether or not to take him tight end 1 over Brock Bowers, just simply because he's going around later. But he is one of the better tight end values that you can get, to me, in the mid-third round. And I think if there's a situation where if people in your league are trying to draft their running backs and wide receivers early, maybe they're taking quarterbacks in there, hopefully not Patrick Mahomes, but if Trey McBride falls into the late third, I think that becomes amazing value, and I would definitely be all over trying to get him, because he's one of the few tight ends, as I mentioned in that video, that you can guarantee yourself every week production at an elite level. It's him, Bowers, and Kittle, and then after that, it's a pretty big drop-off at that position. Elijah Higgins is the backup. Before McBride really broke onto the scene, Higgins showed some flashes at times, but he's really nothing more than a handcuffed in the deepest of leagues right now. This defense is very underrated. And the thing that I like about Arizona is I believe in the first week they're playing New Orleans, which is a potentially very good matchup that you can get in week 1. Yes, they are playing New Orleans, and then they play Carolina after that. So Carolina's offense looking a little bit better than it has over the past few seasons. They did show some signs of life late in the season. But this is an underrated defense. Jonathan Gannon has really made them a lot more reputable than they have been historically over the last half decade. So with this Arizona defense, I think this is a great option that will not get drafted but can potentially be picked up as a streamer for the first 2 weeks of the season and be pretty effective for you. So I will go a little bit more in depth on this in my defense video that's coming out later in the week. But they will be one of the ones that I will be targeting as a good value defense that you can get undrafted. And then Chad Ryland as the kicker. This is another situation much like the defense where I think that Chad Ryland could be interesting too. Kickers, the key thing with them is if they're playing at a dome, that helps you in those cold weather games that you get later on versus the guys that are playing outside. The ones indoors are generally more reliable. So he has that going for him. This offense could be pretty potent too, but may struggle to score touchdowns because of some of the limitations that they have outside of the top end guys. So I think that Chad Ryland could be successful too in fantasy, and he's not getting drafted. So I'll go more in depth on all the kickers and defenses later, but just this team in particular has pretty underrated defense and kicker value in my opinion. Next we go to the Los Angeles Los Angeles Rams. We already did the Chargers, but we have the Los Angeles Rams coming up next. And Matt Stafford, I don't love him for fantasy. Currently in my quarterback rankings, I have him as my 23rd quarterback. And a lot of that is because he's dealing with the back injury that has limited him at camp so far. And if for whatever reason that does not get under control, then their backup after that is Jimmy Garoppolo, and then it's Stetson Bennett. Sorry. And if they have to go to Garoppolo, this is not good news for this offense. But just even when Matt Stafford is healthy, he's not really an elite fantasy quarterback. He is more of he's a little bit like Mahomes in a sense that he does just enough of what is needed to win. It's not always pretty, but he is effective as a real-life quarterback, not as much as a stats-producing fantasy quarterback. So I don't love him already, and then you add the back injury on top of that, and it's not really great right now in Los Angeles. But I will say that there are going to be some matchups where he will be good for streaming, and we'll keep an eye on that as the season goes along. But I don't really love him as somebody that should be drafted. And even in the 2 QB leagues, I think there's some second quarterbacks I would probably prefer over him. Kyren Williams is a second-round running back going that has pretty good value. I think a lot of people are still scared about the Blake Corum pick, what that will do to Kyren Williams' value. But for me personally, I'm not really very worried about that. I think that Kyren Williams was very effective last season as an every down back, and I see that continuing to be the case. Blake Corum, I think, could get involved from time to time. But if anything, I think the fact that they drafted Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn as a 4th-round pick is more of an indication of their maybe not feeling the best about Blake Corum, because I think that Kyren Williams to me is still clearly going to be the number 1, but maybe they want to bring in Hunter to potentially compete with Corum for the number 2. So I don't love Kyren Williams personally as a second-round pick that I love to draft every single time I'm taking when I'm doing my mock drafts, but I still think he's great value. He's pretty underrated, and I think there's a chance he slips to the 3rd, but could still be a top 10 running back in fantasy. I think especially now that they have Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, especially, that can help definitely create some opportunity because the defense will have to focus their attention on those two as well. And that is where we move to Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. Puka is a first-round graded wide receiver. I think that's a pretty good pick you could take. I would just closely monitor the Stafford situation, because if he is, for whatever reason, not able to get his health under control by like let's say 3 weeks from now when we're getting to draft day, then I would have a lot of hesitancy with Puka in the first round. I would probably start looking at some of the other guys that are coming up after him, like Brian Thomas Jr., guys like that, to potentially start looking at over Puka. But all that being said, he is one of the best receiver talents in the league, and if Matt Stafford is healthy, I think he is a good value to take in the first round. Davante Adams, this is where I get a little bit more concerned, because he did look great last season with Aaron Rodgers in certain games, but he also really did not look very good for the vast majority of 2024. And I think a lot of that is partially because he switched teams, he's learning the new offense, and there's a certain degree of challenge that comes with that. But as a 5th round wide receiver in fantasy, I just really don't know if I want to go there with Davante Adams. I think a lot of times with this Rams offense, it seems like it's really best suited to support one wide receiver. Not as and we saw a lot of times in the games with Cooper Kupp and Puka when they were both playing, is that a lot of times the target share favored one or the other. And I think that there's, especially here with Puka versus Davante Adams, they're going to favor Puka Nacua. Because they're very effective at the run game. They're going to rely on that. And when they do throw the ball, it's going to be mostly aimed towards their one. So because of that, there's a lot of concerns with me with Davante Adams in terms of how exactly he'll look for fantasy this season. I think he's more like 7th round value, but not 5th at all. Then there's a pretty big drop-off from the rest of their receivers. They have Tutu Atwell, who has been on the team for a couple of years, hasn't really been able to break out fully yet, but he did have his best season last year. He'll have the chance to be the 3rd wide receiver, as well as Jordan Whittington, who had some chances as well last year when both Puka and Kupp were injured, and was relevant for fantasy. So this is a name to keep an eye on, but probably not one that I would roster except for the deepest of leagues. Tight end. So here's where things get a little bit interesting with Los Angeles. Tyler Higbee has been the incumbent there for a while, but he's dealt with some injuries, not always reliable. They bring in 2nd round pick Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon, and I think this is good underrated value that you can take in the deepest of leagues. I talked about him in my tight end ranking video. He's my number 28 tight end. I don't know what the opportunity will exactly look like for him, because in general the Rams tight ends are not always the centerpiece of their offense, and plus he's got to earn the starting role first of all. But I think there is a void that could be filled by him to become the starting tight end, and that has value in and of itself with the Rams and a team like that should be pretty competitive on offense for the majority of the season. Colby Parkinson coming back too, but he's never really been a big fantasy guy anyway. The Rams defense, I think, is solid. They will have some matchups in which they'll be good to stream, but probably will not get drafted. And then Josh Carty, the kicker. This is another kicker that I think is going kind of in that undrafted range that I think could be pretty valuable for you in fantasy, especially the fact that he's playing in a dome for the majority of the season as well. Next, we will go to the San Francisco 49ers, and the key with this offense right now is the receiver core is just kind of in a complete funk. Brandon Ayuk is recovering from his injury. They overpaid him last season, probably should have traded him in hindsight, but he tore his knee really badly. He's still recovering from that. Now Juwan Jennings, who actually was way better than Brandon Ayuk last year, now wants that contract because they overpaid Brandon Ayuk in the first place, which they shouldn't have done. So now Juwan Jennings isn't practicing, and now Ricky Pearsall is the wide receiver 1. It's just, the whole thing is a mess. And because of that, I think this definitely hurts Brock Purdy's value. Purdy is a good second quarterback to take in the Superflex leagues, but to me, he's not somebody that should be drafted in single quarterback leagues. I have him as my QB 16. He's going a little bit higher than I would ideally like to take him. But I really worry with these wide receivers just what his options are going to be, because when you take away his elite wide receivers like what happened last season, he definitely looked a lot worse, especially for fantasy purposes. So he's going to have to prove that he can, still be good for fantasy without his elite guys. And that'll be something to monitor. Mac Jones is still in the league, operating as the backup for Brock Purdy now. Probably the best situation for him to learn under Kyle Shanahan and hopefully flip his value for next season. Christian McCaffrey, I like him as a second-round pick, to be honest with you. I think a lot of people are concerned about the age drop-off with him. But, I mean, to me, I kind of see him similarly as a guy like Derrick Henry, and for different skill set purposes, but somebody that will be good in the NFL for still a couple more seasons. McCaffrey is, if he's not if there's nothing else that's really great about him, it's the fact that he has an elite pass catching skill and he's an elite route runner at the running back position. And I think that skills like that, some of those intangibles will last as players age. So McCaffrey, maybe you're not going to get that 2023 season again, but I do think he's going to give you way better value than what people are kind of rating him as right now. And I think if you're getting him at mid-second round value, maybe even late second round because people seem to be kind of scared off by him, I think you're getting kind of the equivalent production of what we saw with Derrick Henry when he slipped a little bit. I think this is a good opportunity to have Christian McCaffrey without the typical price level that he's going to cost you. Getting older for sure, and he's injury prone, but I love the value here in the second round for McCaffrey, especially given the fact that you don't really have a lot of certainty at the receiver positions on this team. But if you do have McCaffrey, you want to make sure that you handcuff him with Isaac Guerendo. We saw what happened with that situation last year with Jordan Mason when McCaffrey started having Achilles tendonitis, and then Jordan Mason was essentially locked and loaded for the majority of the season as the starting running back there. So I think it was up until around like mid-November when McCaffrey actually played. So if you do, we've seen this story before with CMC is what I'm saying, and you want to make sure you get Guerendo in one of your late round picks to handcuff him if you do draft him. Jordan James and Amir Abdullah are the deep names to monitor should there be any injuries. And this team had tons of injuries last season. So I'm just saying that because you want to make sure that you're handcuffing your best players. And I think that this 49ers system generally produces good running back value in fantasy. So they're all important names should injury happen. The wide receivers I mentioned a little bit earlier is a mess. I personally am going to be trying to avoid Brandon Ayuk. I just don't know how he's going to look coming off this knee injury, and he really did not look very good in 2024 even before he got hurt. And even just before that, I think he was definitely overhyped by certain games in 2023 that made him look really good, but he was not a very consistent fantasy player. So I'm just in general not a big Ayuk fan. I'm probably going to be avoiding him. Juwan Jennings I still like, though, is somebody that based on his ADP and where he's going, and I believe he's actually going later than Ayuk. Double check where exactly Juwan Jennings is going. He's going in the 10th round. Ayuk is going in the 12th. So, yeah, a little bit wrong there. But I think Juwan Jennings in the 10th is good value because if they get that contract done and he's able to play, this is a guy that should be at least, I would say at least a top 25 wide receiver in fantasy, and somebody that you could probably start every single week, probably with even higher upside to get into the top 15 potentially. So great value that you can get there late in the 10th round, personally. So it's a situation to monitor, but if it wouldn't hurt to just stash him on your bench and see how this situation unfolds. Ricky Pearsall, as I said, and this is another guy that I like because he is getting drafted pretty late in the process. He's going in the 12th round as well, right around the range of Ayuk. And I would just rather take the chance on Pearsall, former number one pick in 2024, to potentially figure it out should anything happen where Juwan Jennings doesn't play or this calf injury is actually real and he's going to have to sit out some games. Ricky Pearsall then becomes the pretty clear number one target among the wide receivers on this team. Demarcus Robinson coming over from the Rams. It's an interesting idea, but not really. I mean, I think he'll be in stream consideration if Ayuk and Jennings are going to be out for the first couple weeks of the season. And you could say the same thing about Jacob Cowing as well. And Russell Gage, who's coming off a major knee injury, trying to make a comeback too. That'll be interesting to see what happens with him as well. George Kittle, I talked about him in my tight end video, so you can check out a little bit more about him there. But he's one of the few tight ends, much like McBride and Bowers, as I already mentioned, who will probably has a case to be the number one target in general on this offense. And Kittle is going way later than McBride and Bowers. Kittle is in general going in the 5th round. That is great value to me to get him there. One of the better valued targets that you can get at that tight end position at his ADP in the draft. And gives you some great upside. A lot of good upside potential with him. Luke Farrell, Ross Dwelly are the backups. Not much to really say there. This defense. So the thing I really like about the 49ers defense is that they actually have the easiest strength of schedule based on 2024 opponents for this upcoming season. They have lost some of the big names from years past, but they still have Nick Bosa. They still have Fred Warner. Those are the two like linchpins of their defense. And then they added some good talent in the draft like Mykel Williams. So I think this is going to be an underrated defense that should be a top 10 defense, but is not getting drafted. So again, this is good value. They have a good strength of schedule that should help them out as well. I think this is a good defense to take a flyer on that is not going to cost you that much. Jake Moody, I just don't have a lot of confidence with him right now. He looked really bad in 2024. I need to see a lot more for him to take him in fantasy. And then lastly, our last team we're going to preview in the series is the Seattle Seahawks. I talked about Sam Darnold in my quarterback video. A lot of people are scared off by how he finished this season. And because of that, they're projecting him to be like 24th to 30th even. And I just personally do not see that. I know that he did have some bad games in Minnesota, but I think he's honestly in a better situation in Seattle where he doesn't really have the level of pressure that he did in Minnesota. Remember there, they had J.J. McCarthy, who is a first-round pick, who could theoretically overtake him at any time, and he may have even been the day one starter, but the fact that he had the meniscus injury, he just never really got an opportunity to play last season. And in Seattle, people are kind of assuming that, Jalen Milroe will come in and threaten to be the starting quarterback. I just don't see that personally. One, why would they give him this type of contract and then draft Jaden Milroe? I don't think that really makes a lot of sense. And then the other thing, too, is that Milroe was a pretty unpolished quarterback coming out of Alabama. A good runner, but needs to learn the game in terms of being a quarterback, like in pocket skills, reads, things like that. So that whole formula to me suggests that they are not going to be looking to try to move on from Sam Darnold unless he proves that he can't handle it. Then you look at the receiving options and running back options on this team. He's got a lot of good ones. He's got JSN, Cooper Kupp coming over. I think he'll still be solid. You got Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet. I mean, I don't really see what the red flags are with Sam Darnold personally. I think if you take those two games out of the picture and you look at the vast majority of his 2024 season, he was elite for fantasy. And I think that you're getting great value with Sam Darnold because of how far he's fallen. I have him right around my quarterback 18, but he's going generally around late 20s. And to me, that's just not a good projection for how much potential I think Sam Darnold has. Very talented quarterback, and I think that he could take advantage of it with this system. He's getting Clint Kubiak as well as his OC, who was a very good offensive coordinator, did wonders with Derek Carr in New Orleans. I think that, to me, Darnold is a very underrated sleeper. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Kenneth Walker, I really like him as a talent for the running back position, but he gets injured so much that it's really hard for me to trust him. I actually kind of like Zach Charbonnet more as somebody that is going much later in drafts. Charbonnet is going around the 11th round, and at that point, you're not really getting a lot of running backs that really have the chance to step in and become a starter in their respective offenses. But I think that Zach Charbonnet is one of those guys that could do that. And he actually looked better at times than Kenneth Walker did last season anyway. So one of the better picks that you can take late to me is Zach Charbonnet in the 11th round. I think it would honestly be better to try to take a chance on him than some of the other hypothetical guys that could be stepping up into RB1 opportunities, but we don't really know what that's going to look like. So I'm thinking the Jaden Blues, the Javonte Williams, both on the Cowboys, Tajay Spears in Tennessee, other names like that, guys that are good enough that they could step into that role, but maybe they're just not cut out for it. I think that, for me personally, Charbonnet is definitely cut out for being a starting level running back and could replace Kenneth Walker. At the wide receiver position, you have JSN. And JSN, to me, is another really good sleeper that you can get that I think should be just as good as he was last season. I mean, this is a guy that was the number 9 wide receiver in PPR leagues last season, and now he's going in the 3rd round. And I think part of that is concern about Cooper Kupp being there now, concern about Sam Darnold. But for me, JSN, first round wide receiver for a reason, and this is his offense that I think he should be able to get a pretty large target share and be pretty effective. As a 3rd round wide receiver, him and Tyreek Hill are the two ones that I look at in those range and think that those are pretty good valued players. I would probably rather take the chance with JSN because of the upside of a guy that is younger and, he's in a system where I think he could be employed as a main target. We didn't really necessarily see that sometimes with Tyreek Hill. It wasn't really getting the target volume share that we would like at times. We saw in 2023. But I think that JSN, I think they're going to try to design this offense around him, and he'll be good next season. Cooper Kupp, this is not a bad pick either. He's, he had another bad end of the season, much like Darnold, and I think that soured a lot of people's takes on him. But going in the mid to late 9th round now, early 10th, I think Cooper is a very good pickup as well to just stash on your bench and see what happens. Should be the wide receiver too. I'm not expecting anything crazy, but I think it could really, especially in full PPR leagues, give you some good value. Torrey Holton is a 5th round pick that they're bringing in. He has a chance to compete for the 3rd wide receiver. You have MVS as well competing for that. And MVS is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, if you're not familiar with him. This is a guy that I almost always avoid for fantasy because he either gives you an all or nothing game. He'll give you 100 yards, touchdown on 4 receptions, or he'll give you like 1 reception, 20 yards. It's just too much volatility to me. I generally avoid him. Jake Bobo is a sleeper who's been around this team for a bit, who could step up and be the wide receiver 3, but I would probably take a chance on Troy Horton in the most of those 3 players. At the tight end position, much like I talked about with Terrence Ferguson on the Rams, Elijah Arroyo has a chance to step up here and become the starting tight end on this team. He has A.J. Barner in front of him, who A.J. Barner is not really a special talent, for lack of better words, at the tight end position. Arroyo is coming into a situation where he could step up, get more involvement in this offense, and be... and be a pretty good option. He's another 2nd round pick, much like Terrence Ferguson coming from Miami. I think that there is a good chance that he could become a solid tight end too. He's not somebody that I'd be wanting to draft, but in very deep leagues, if you're looking for somebody to keep an eye on over the first few weeks of the season, check the targets. This is one of the names that I'm going to have marked is Elijah Arroyo on the Seattle Seahawks. And other than that, you have Eric Saubert and Nick Callerup, who I don't think either of them will be fantasy relevant. The Seattle defense, I think, should also be pretty good because this is a defensive unit led by a good head coach defensively, Mike McDonald. I think they will find a way to be relevant in certain matchups and good for streaming. And then Jason Myers, another solid kicker that you can get pretty late or undrafted that should be good for certain matchups to stream. I don't love him as much, though, because of the rainy conditions you get sometimes in Seattle home games, but very talented kicker. Definitely in the conversation of guys to look at for week 1. That is all that I've got for the divisional previews now. So we will be focusing a little bit more on the next few weeks leading up to the draft on, one, the position strategy. We'll be closing out the rest of those videos in terms of how I rank them and what the strategy should be. Then we'll be going through mock drafts on Sleeper, and I will go through players that I'm targeting at certain positions in the draft, certain strategies you can look at. And the purpose of that is to help you get ready for your draft coming up in the next few weeks as well. As always, if you have any questions about any of this or want to drop a comment, please do. I reply to all my commenters, so please take advantage of that. And we will see you guys next time. Hope you have a good week. Bye.